Good evening, welcome to the stream tonight and to some more pyrography. And a cup of tea. So I will better go on with things. Yep, we have power. Good evening everybody. So tonight is doing some work just in this area here to start with. It's a little bit of an abrupt change. I want it to be a little bit more of a softer merged change up, and I just need to darken a little bit under there as well, but not too dark because I want to maintain the contrast. And then we're going to darken the front of the elephant down as well, or at least the upper part of the elephant. So I shall get on with it. So I trust everybody is well today. Up here in the UK, in Yorkshire, we've had an interesting sort of day. For those that may have known, yesterday in the UK had a lot of temperature records broken, and there was lots of forecasts for hot weather for quite some time. Today it's been raining and quite cold, so somewhat of an interesting day. But in the meantime, I'm working with a hot tool, so being cool is not a problem. Yeah, this thing is working. Wow, that's not done that for a long time. I have an air conditioner behind me, which you might have been able to hear. The compressor's just turned off. The compressor turns off because the air conditioner's reached temperature, so it's just blowing air now. And I don't remember the last time it did that. Kind of had me wondering then whether it was faulty. Suppose we'll find out if it starts up again, or maybe tomorrow we'll find out if it starts tomorrow. Yeah, that area there looks a bit better than it did earlier, because it was a bit light. So now I'm going to do some more work in this area to extend this darkness and hopefully fade it out a little. So it's a case of slowing down the movement of the pen across the surface. That way I apply more heat in a particular area, or I apply heat for longer in a particular area, which should make it go darker. Theme Hospital, hello, and Steve, welcome Steve, welcome both of you to the studio this evening. And how's things going for both of you? Thank you for dropping in, Steve. I mean, I've watched you for so many months. It's kind of it's kind of like meeting heroes in a way. For anybody who is watching, Steve is one of the first people I ever watched on Twitch. Euro Truck Simulator, and I watched Steve because I enjoyed the way he just interacts with people, but also because I was interested in Euro Truck Simulator, and Steve at the time was saying, because he has a Class 1 drive, it is Class 1 still, isn't it, Steve? Class 1 driving licence, and it was kind of see how a professional does it, and it was interesting to see. Oh dear, that's not so good. I thought you were streaming earlier on today. I did. Or is it just at various times of the day it just goes a bit crackers? Yeah, okay. I do try and watch you most days. Well, I do try and watch you most days, but I'm at work usually, so I don't actually get a chance to chat, and the iPad often doesn't connect the chat anyway. So, and I often watch your streams. That's starting to work a little bit better. I'm trying to just darken around this area just a little bit. It's a bit abrupt is the change. And it's a little bit light over at this side as well. It's not too bad, but it's just a little bit light, so I might darken that down a bit before I put the grass in. Oh, is that so you can both play together, Steve? Then with the two PS4s. Okay. Rather than having to play split screen. No problem. You're a good streamer. I enjoy the way in which you stream, to be honest, which is why I watch, of course. None of it's fake. It's all it's all how I kind of imagine you would be. There's nothing fake about it, which you sometimes feel like with other streamers. And Theme Hospital, yeah. Sometimes it's annoying when Windows remembers where everything was and puts it back in the same place. It's not so bad with OBS, but at work when I do something like a screen share, and then you'll get messages and things popping up right in the middle of the screen that you're sharing, and sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing. I believe you said you were looking for a a job, Steve. Have you managed to find one yet? I obviously I wasn't taking enough notice to know that you didn't have one at the moment, or was it that you were looking for a replacement one? Oh, I just love. I was explaining to my wife as well. I just love the way that you deal with people who disruptive people that come into the stream. And the trolls and things like that. Because she does worry about me, but oh, that's a pity. Well, I hope you get something soon, Steve. Either that, or I hope you get thousands of followers and you can end up doing Twitch full time. One or the other, whichever you would prefer. Yeah, we had a few idiots in the stream the other night, which is unusual on Creative, and she got a bit worried about me, did my wife. So I'm somewhat laid back about it. I just ban them, but it doesn't bother me. But it bothered her a bit, and so I was explaining your sort of technique along the lines of, it was along the lines of me imitating you, if you like. I've been in Afghanistan, I've been in places like that where people do real harm. You on the typing that, no way, no way, not interested. Oh well, you got to have some hope, Steve. I mean, at least you potentially stand a chance of it. I mean, I'm in Creative. Oh dear. Plus I have a tendency to stop what I'm doing to look at the camera to talk to people, so yeah. No, it's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing, Steve. But it just amuses me, and I kind of get the impression it amuses you as well when they try, and you're just try something interesting. But yeah. Okay, I've got to remember to keep this. Well, I was about to say I've got to remember to keep this thing on frame. Well, why don't I just tip the camera down a bit? Sometimes the simplest of solutions. That's getting there. It's I have to be just a bit careful because it can go really dark really quickly if I'm not careful. And I kind of only want. It's a relatively subtle change. And with pyrography, sometimes it can just change really rapidly on you, and then you end up back with a situation you were trying to work around. Yeah. Let me darken the front of this elephant down a little bit here. It's under his sort of head, and so this area of his chest is going to be quite dark, even with the sunlight coming at quite a low angle, which is what it's intended to represent here. If I darken this down a little bit, then you'll see a bit more contrast here, and then the chest will stand proud from the background. a little bit of smoke coming off of this, which is quite unusual. Although the tool isn't actually hot enough to burn literally to burn anything, so I don't have too much of a problem with that. Sometimes actually, because I've got cats, if you do see smoke, it's quite as likely to be a cat hair that's suddenly got heated up as well. No, no theme hospital, she doesn't at all. In actual fact, she actually can't understand why people would want to watch. She thinks what I do is, amazing, if you like, in the artwork that's produced, but she just doesn't understand why people want to watch people play games or do artwork like this. And then she'll go and watch Coronation Street. Graya, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening. Nice to see you again. So for anybody that is, there's a few people in stream. For anybody that's in stream, I recommend you check out Stevo 762002 there, who is in the stream. He does some quite well. I think he's quite awesome at streaming, and he does some of my favourite games, like Euro Truck Simulator, although he plays multiplayer, which I don't do very often, which is just as interesting. I don't mean it's bad. Farming Simulator, but he does other things like Battlefield 4 and Call of Duty and things like that, and he's a very interesting streamer to watch, so I recommend you check him out. That needs some texture on it, otherwise it looks a bit odd, but it'll do for the minute. It looks like he's wearing a bib. Yep, I'm not too bad, Graham. Oh, all right. I'm not going to argue, Steve. If you really want to say it like that. I think you better, but it's going to be interesting tonight. If let's see how chat and the stream go, because I thought I'd try turning on the beta feature, which is supposed to make the stream delay a bit less, and therefore the chat should be closer to what I'm saying, and that way hopefully my memory might be a lot better and actually remember what it is we're talking about. So if you if it's working fine or not working fine, feel free to let me know, because I can always turn it back off again for the next stream, but it seemed like an interesting thing to try, especially since Twitch is changing the or supposed to have changed chat into HTML5, so that's supposed to be faster anyway and connect better. Okay, that's about okay. It's a little bit directional. We've got a few dark area, a few light patches. Thanks, Steve. I half wonder whether it's just like a placebo thing, you know, tick this and everybody thinks it's working faster, but yeah. I don't know whether it actually does anything at all, Graya, but we shall see if it makes an impact, or whether it's just hot air. I can understand the buffering, but it does make some conversations rather interesting, especially when my memory goes. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. All we're going to do is somebody post something, and we can then see if it is it, or you guys can see if it's any faster. I won't know, but. Right, I want it to darken this area a little bit. It's a bit. It's not bad actually, but it's I just don't feel it's a little bit light over this side test. I should have been watching really, shouldn't I, for that? But you're relying on me also catching the stream, the chat just changing. There we go, 20 seconds. Well, it's a bit better than 30 or 40. Now we get to find out if my short-term memory is at least 20 seconds long, because we know it's not 30 seconds long. Now it will be roughly a curve that you get if you were looking out with a shadow, so I'm not. I don't need to make this significantly darker, but I just want to make it a little bit more prominent. I must be concentrating, the tongue's starting to come out. Why do people do that when they concentrate on stuff? It's kind of lucky I'm not looking for a real uniform colour here, because I'm not getting it. I'm not that good, but the slightly random colour does help kind of with the background texture. It doesn't look, it looks more like sort of ground and dirt and quite a dark evening atmosphere as well. So my lack of ability is actually helping. Okay, let me have a looks about okay. Right. Bit bright just under the trunk here. Let's just add a little bit more darkness in there. Good question. What's a good... my memory, I think. not sure what the good question was now, Graya. Steve, thank you very much for that. Actually, the camera's zoomed in. Well, the camera's actually not zoomed in. It's just that close. I'd actually have to tip it up a bit to try and get the whole thing in for you, and then of course I'm getting glare off the light, but oh well, there you go. You see, I told you my memory didn't last 30 seconds. I wonder if there's some form of body language in it as well, because it's things like when somebody's remembering something, their eye position, you look up towards one side. I think it's the left off the top of my head, or most people do. So you can tell when they're recalling something as opposed to making up type of idea. So I wonder if the side the tongue comes out has got some sort of indication as to what level of concentration it is, or something like that. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do now is put some grass in before we go back to actually work on the elephant, because they're not that far off, relatively speaking, this being a completed image. The main block is in there now, the main elements are there. There's a bit more texturing to do on the elephant, and the forehead and the side of the face wants some work. It is too bright at the moment, and I think we're probably a little bit too light around the tusk as well. The tusk is not too bad, but so let me just put that tool over there and turn the heat off, because the grass is getting done with something else. One of these, or one of them. A scalpel. So actually I'm just having a look at, I've got a couple of reference pictures, so I'm just having a look at what grass sort of looks like. I don't know, so it's going to be interesting. So all I'm going to do actually is just scrape through the surface coating to create some patches like that, and then what I was intending to do is just try and go over them again with the pyrography tool, just to darken them a little bit so they don't stand out quite as white. Okay, it looks like I'm not going to get much outside of this dark area here in terms of it showing up. I don't think, it doesn't look like it, so I've learnt something. But what we can do now therefore is just come down over the side here and just put some grass into this bottom section. what I should actually be able to do is layer it a little bit as well. So I should be able to darken this down a little bit again, and then scrape over the top again. To produce a few lighter areas. Now that probably won't show up too much on the camera, but I've got a couple of shades here. Yeah, a little bit like that, Steve. Although I've no practice of doing that, so I'm guessing really. Now, given that I can only do it really effectively in the dark area at the bottom here, I actually don't want to... I was intending to put more on, but I think I only want to put a few areas on, because otherwise it's going to sort of not look particularly good. I'm not necessarily sure it's looking all that good at the moment, and of course if I tip the camera down you'll actually see what I'm doing. Oh dear, it's one problem you game players, Steve, don't have, because you've only got your face cam and that tends to sit there all the time. I keep forgetting to move the camera. If I give a close-up or something like that, and then I'll forget, and yeah, it'll be completely off frame for the next 2 or 3 minutes until somebody reminds me. So I'm just using a scalpel to do this. It's actually a blunt scalpel, but I'm only using the point of it, so the fact that it's blunt has got very little impact on this. Okay. So I'll just colour that in a little, apply a bit of colour to it, which will just tone it down a little bit, and then I can add just a couple of odd, and so unfortunately it doesn't show up so well on stream, but it just adds a little bit of extra texture, and the slight different colour that you can see here. It's a bit like the odd leaf is just twisted slightly. So do I want another bit of that somewhere? Probably, if I'm going to do it, about there. Surprisingly hard to do random scratches. You tend to always keep trying to go in the same direction or a completely opposite direction, which is there we go. That'll do for the moment. It sort of just adds a little bit of texturing to it. not fantastically happy with it. Something I need to practice a bit more, I think, but probably practice a lot more, I think, but it's added a little bit. Unfortunately, I was intending to add quite a bit more up here. In fact, one of the things I might just try is, can I add I can. So what I can do, here is I'm just using the very tip of this pen, or this nib or tool, and I can get very fine lines. So I can put in, I can still put in some more grass up here in the lighter areas, which works quite nicely. So at first I was just going to scrape it, but the scraping doesn't work so well up there, but that does. What I should have done is put the grass at that side. Well, let me put the grass at that side as well, because I've got a shadow there. It would be nice to have something that there's a shadow of. I'll just put in a clump of grass and then extend the shadow a little bit. Okay. Twitch is twitching a little bit. I just had a stream offline notice and then it came back on. So we just as I go further back, if I put, and I'm just playing about with this a little bit, I do need to make sure it's not as dark. It needs, if I sort of just hint at some grass clumps, I've got to make them fairly light, because as we get further into the distance, so that all the shades get lighter. And I'm still off frame. Unfortunately, I can't put the camera any further back because the camera's there. You can see it on the face cam, and it's in my way. Yeah, oh thanks, Steve. And just adding a little bit of texture, really it is. I've never used a tool like this on its point before, so this is an interesting experiment. To use it like this, it's actually creating quite a fine line. I'm not going to be too I've not got to be too particular about these being anything detailed. The intention is not for you to really look at the grass at all. It's just to skip over it and actually look at the main subject. Max out the cake. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the studio this evening. Nice to see you again. You been at working in the shop again today, or has it been a different sort of day? Just going to give the tip of this a bit of a clean. So, an example of just how hot this tip is. It's not even hot enough to char paper. I am cheating a little bit in that I'm keeping this moving. If I hold it in place, it will char the paper quite quickly. But just as an illustration, you can this is kitchen paper, tissue paper, and it doesn't go brown very quickly. It's an illustration of keeping the tool moving, and the colour is quite light. What I have to be careful of is if I do that too much, it will actually colour underneath. Now, okay. Unfortunately, I have been. But well, is it unfortunate? No, it's fortunate, isn't it? Really, it's fortunate I have been working today, but it would be nice to have not been at work. So just a little bit. Do I want any more? The really hard bit about doing some things like I'm doing here, just dropping bits of grass in, is trying not to be symmetrical. Trying not to go, oh, I want one, and it's the same distance apart, or things like that. Being random is quite difficult. Okay, we'll come back to that later if I think I need it. Let me now do some more on this. I did mention I want it to make it a bit darker around the trunk. This is on street, yes it is. And there's a lot of ridges on an elephant's trunk, so what I'm going to do is purposely not be too accurate about creating an even tone. I am purposely creating slightly darker lines. I don't really want to get involved in doing a lot of texturing on the elephant. The idea isn't to sort of do a close-up study of the elephant and the skin textures. It's just to sort of put it into the scene. It's a scene with an elephant. So I want to sort of hint at some of the skin textures. Like there's a lot of ridges obviously around the elephant's trunk. That's obviously, well, not obviously, but it's how it bends. So you get a lot of sort of the ridges. So I want to kind of hint that they're there. Some places it'll be hinted a bit more strongly, like just around this bit here and the bottom. And there's a little bit at the top there. But as you can see, they're hinted a lot more strongly just at this point here, because the shadow, which needs to be a bit darker, is actually sort of the shadow creeps along the deeper ridges that are on this this part of the trunk. Now one of the okay, Max. One of the things, or the tricks to learn, or skills to develop with pyrography, is that you can hold this tool or use this tool in a number of different ways. I can hold it flat, so I'm applying the maximum amount of that flat base to the wood, like using a large iron. So I get a broad sort of line if I do that, and it's quite good for making a continuous smooth shade. What I can equally do is I can tip it up slightly, so I'm essentially using more of just the toe or the tip of the pen, depending on how high I hold it. If I hold it right up, I get these very thin lines like I was doing with the grass. If I hold it just a little bit lower, then I get sort of a wider line, but not quite as wide as holding it flat. So it allows me just to sort of vary the textures depending on just how I want them to appear. So I get more than one use out of the same pen. I don't actually have to switch to another one like a writing tip or a finer tipped pen to get different effects out of it. I can also hold it on its side. Sometimes that's easier to create textures with, or sorry, create smooth areas with, because there's not as much heat applied just from the side as it is flat. So you've got, because you're applying heat a lot more slowly, you've got more control over the colour than you would have sometimes if it's flat straight down. The only problem you have to remember is then if I'm holding it this way, this side of the tool gets a lot more hotter than this side, and so when I put it down flat I have to remember that, and so I don't get a dirty great big brown mark. Stephen 2013. Boo. Okay. Either you are pretending to be a ghost, or you intending to make me jump. The trick to make me jump on these streams is to follow me, because it brings up a graphic on screen and a jingle, which is a little bit loud, but not too bad. But I'm not usually expecting it, so it does tend to make me jump a little bit. But good evening, Stephen 2030. Thank you very much for dropping in. It's very kind of you, and I do hope you enjoy your stay in the studio. Now the sun's coming in from this angle, so we're getting this lower area is slightly darker than this sort of just area across here. So I've just got to bear that in mind. I need it to sort of be a curve almost just into this area around here. And I actually have to remember that if the elephant stuck its trunk out straight, these lines would just be from one end straight to the other side. They're not actually curved at this particular point, but I have to remember that because it's curved that way, they're all going towards a point about here. So it's like radiating out from a centre, which is roughly about there, which is where the elephant's curved its trunk. Hi, Annalou. I was just thinking then, of course, the bit about speeding up the stream delay so that chat is a little bit more closer to what I'm saying does rely on the fact that I'm actually notice chat. Otherwise, that stream delay doesn't make a great deal of difference. So for everybody that's watching the stream, again, good evening to you all. You are welcome to lurk if indeed that's what you wish to do. If you're not familiar with what you're looking at, apart from the fact there is a big hint there, pyrography. Pyrography, literal translation of which is writing with fire. The pyro being the fire, graphy meaning writing. It's sort of Greek. It's Greek roots on the word. But I'm not writing, and I really hope there's no fire. So I tend to translate it more as painting with heat. That's kind of more in keeping with what I'm actually doing. There are people that do use fire. Now, literally, they use acetylene torches and blow torches. Generally speaking, they're using a bigger bit of wood, and they're doing it outdoors, or at least not in a small studio like this. But what I'm using here is an electrically heated tool, of which I've got a variety of tips that I use. This one just happens to suit what I'm trying to do here, which is fairly large areas, but with the option of just tilting the tool a little bit to get some finer detail into the work as I progress. Thank you very much, Stephen. And I guess I should at this point just remind anybody that is watching, if you're liking what you're seeing and would like to sort of keep track of me, then please push the follow button. That way you'll be able to find me easily again when I go live. But if you don't want it, it's not compulsory. I'm not kicking anybody out just because they're not following, so don't worry about that. And those of you also that don't know, we have Steve762002 in the stream, who is also a streamer, who streams games. And some, well, I think they're really good games. Like Farming Simulator, Euro Truck Simulator, and multiplayer version, Call of Duty, Battlefield 4, a number of those sorts of games as well. So check out Steve's channel and follow him as well if you enjoy that sort of thing. Now hopefully this should now start to be looking more like the trunk of an elephant. So you sort of the ripples that you expect to see on the trunk. Is my work for sale? Some of it is for sale, yes, Stephen. Unfortunately, pyrography tends to be a little bit expensive, relatively speaking, because of the number of hours that need to go into it. But some of the other things that I do are perhaps a little bit more affordable, depends on what you feel, I guess. the most affordable stuff that I do is probably the jewellery. I do have some examples if you want to see some of the jewellery. It's made out of rings. Technically it's called chainmail, but I very rarely use the title just because everybody thinks it's armour. But this is just a piece of practice piece, but this is a particular chain in a very nice sort of pink and light blue. What else do we have here? I've got a nice, this is a necklace, this is one of my wife's necklaces. Camera won't focus. If you want to see more detail, let me just focus the camera a little bit closer up, then I'll go back to the pyrography. But wish I could hold this and let me put that tool down before I burn something that I didn't intend to burn. But a bit better light on it. But this is a particular combination called Byzantine weave, which is quite a. On this one, this one's got a block of colour in the end, silver, blue, and silver. For my wife, that signifies a cat's eye. She's crackers about cats. But so some of that's more affordable. But if anybody really wants to buy a pyrographic piece, I'm quite willing to sell it. Yep, G27, very nice wheel. I have one too. But I do something with it that Steve 76 2002 doesn't, and that is I play Farming Simulator with it as well, because I program all the buttons up and everything. So I think you Steve, use like an Xbox controller, I think, don't you, for it, or do you just use keyboard? Either way, it's still fun to watch. I wouldn't like to play Euro Truck Simulator without it though. What I want to do for Euro Truck Simulator, just purely because I like doing odd things like that, is to actually put a set of gauges around it. So I don't need the. I think in later Euro Truck you can take the gauges off the screen, or you can position yourself so you can't see them. So I kind of like have a proper hardware cluster with the speedo and a couple of gauges on it. So maybe get around to doing that one day. The controller, yeah. I certainly would enjoy that, Steve. Unfortunately, most of the time I'm either at work having my tea or streaming. So, but I would do, yeah. When you first started doing that, I did try and join you a couple of times, but unfortunately, just time, unfortunately. It is fun. I think I've done a couple of been on your stream a couple of times with Euro Truck. You bought Stephen? How much did he cost? Does that make him a slave? Not sure I like slavery. Spelling mistakes, aren't they? You can read all sorts of things into spelling mistakes. These days, though, when somebody says FS 2015, I have to sometimes think whether they're talking about Flight Simulator or Farming Simulator. which of course, Tokyo Farming Flight Simulator, Steve does Flight Simulator occasionally, don't you? I believe, Steve. If I remember rightly, you like flying the light and small twins, the prop planes. No, it's okay, Theme Hospital. It's I I just pick up on those things. It's my sort of humour. The odd spelling mistake sometimes completely changes the meaning of a sentence. I'm just tweaking your leg a little bit. Don't worry about it. Oh no, yeah, Stephen, FSX. I kind of understand that. It's just somebody. I'm getting old, you know. Somebody says FS. First thing that comes to mind is well, it's either Farming Simulator or it's Flight Simulator. Because of course, FSX is a particular version of Flight Simulator. I first got Flight Simulator a long time ago. I never actually bought FSX until it went on Steam, and I only got it on Steam because it was a couple of pounds. I kind of want to play it, but games like that I kind of want a proper yoke for. Just the same as with Euro Truck with the wheel. And the Train Simulator, I used the controller for that, Rail Driver. There's something, it changes the experience completely when you use a physical device to control something on screen, and it makes a heck of a, it really adds to the realism in some ways. I mean, you might be flying I don't know, you might be flying a Boeing 747 with a wheel that, with a yoke that's from a Cessna, but there's still something about it being a physical thing. That's, you turn it and you bank an aircraft, or you slam a throttle forward on the rail driver and you get wheel slip on the train. It really does make a difference. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with all games at the moment. So with all trains. I understand that the manufacturer, I've forgotten who it is now, but they've just released a beta version of the driver that works with more of them. I don't know, Steve, if you know of Matt Pendleton, who streams in Train Simulator section. He comes on about 9:30, so I usually overlap him by about half an hour. And he's written his own drivers for it, which works with all the trains, which I'm hoping he's going to release at some point. And he's also managed to put gauges around, some really expensive Satek gauges, because he's got about 8 of them, and they're about £120 a piece. But I think he got them given to him by Satek. But physical stuff. But that would help a lot. Yeah, the latest one's Theme Hospital, which has just been released, and there's as a beta, which is also designed to work with the next patch of Train Simulator as well. Should improve that situation. It's the virtual throttle thing, but I don't know much about it. So far, all I've tried to drive with it has worked, but I don't go crackers buying lots of trains. Okay, I didn't get an email about that. So was the email about the beta software then, Theme Hospital, or something else? This is getting a bit dirty. I need to give it a clean, otherwise I'm going to start creating blotches on the work. There we go. Okay. What sort of trains do people like driving then? The steam engines, the diesels, any particular favourites? I just like nice looking trains. I never particularly know. You know, you get the people that'll know what a Class 66 is or something like that. Although I do happen to know what that one is. But I've watched the Matt stream for example, and there'll be people on there talking about particular classes of locomotives, and I'm going, I haven't got the foggiest idea what they are. I just like the look of some of them, which is kind of like why. In fact, I happen to know what the Class 66 is because I started doing a practice piece on the Class 66 locomotive, and I happen to know it was a Class 66 because of the number. But that was about it. But I kind of like that enough so that not only did I do it with pyrography, I did it with punchcraft as well. So anybody who doesn't or hasn't seen some of my other streams, this was done with a technique called punchcraft. So same engine, same picture, but this is kind of like a miniature bug almost. It's that same sort of style of loops of material coming through a backing. Now the 801, I think I've just seen a video on that, so that's one of the streamlined things, isn't it? The good old 125, yeah. Yes, I like the 125, especially because it was used a lot on the East Coast main line, and which is, being in Yorkshire, that's my line, so to speak. No, it's kind of, there are some engines, trains that look like they're meant to be trains. You know, things like the 125, it kind of looks like it's meant to be a passenger train, but and then there's others which you kind of think it looks like a van on wheels or something. It's kind of like, well, that Class 66, it looks big and heavy and a chunky locomotive. You know, it's if you could pick it up, it would be really heavy type of thing. And then there's others like some of these two car things that look like a bus on rails. They're all different anyway. I mean, if everybody liked the same thing and it was all you know, just one train, then it'd be quite boring, really, wouldn't it? So. But I do admit I tend to go by what a train. When if I want to go out and buy one, I'll put them on my wish list type of thing, which is what I tend to do a lot of, and then forget about it. I do tend to get the ones that look nice. Mind you, one of the things that some of them have started doing is they've now started simulating some of the full operations. So I think there's a couple of locomotives that actually, well, if you do it that way, you can go through a full startup procedure from cold and dark all the way up to the thing running, and I quite applaud that. I quite like that idea. A little bit more than, not necessarily just driving. It adds a little bit more interest, I think, to it, to be able to get into the loco and then have to start the thing and prepare it and then actually drive the thing. London to Peterborough. So Theme Hospital, I've no idea where Peterborough is. So I've heard of it, and I know there's a real there's a what do they call it, a route pack for London to Peterborough, but I've no idea where it is. Yeah, some of the American routes look quite interesting. Horseshoe Curve and things like that. And I've been watching Matt drive some of those, and you get some like four locomotives at the front. There'll be another couple at the back, and there's about 600 wagons. All right, I'm exaggerating a bit, but the display on the bottom. I don't know if anybody watches him, but the display at the bottom, it's half full in really tiny little scale. And it's kind of half full of trucks, and you just think, God, those trains. It's the sort of train which, if you stood next to it and it's going past you at speed, it's still 15 minutes before you see the other end. That's not too bad. Not too bad there. Bit of reward, cup of tea. Nearly. Now darken that area. That's not too bad. Okay, I've got a bit of a dark area there. I think that probably means I've made it dark across there, but I've got a line, so I need to adjust the shading a little bit. So it fades out. I need it to fade out a little bit more. That's a bit better. This is a little bit of a sharp edge on that shadow as well. Light tends to creep around corners, so not too bad there. Can I explain the tool that you use? And City Skyline Blue Skip Screen Geotheme Hospital. That's not very good. Yeah, Stephen, I can. It's electrically heated. It's a low voltage tool, so it operates with about 1.5 to 3 volts. So same as a torch, basically. You know, an AA battery. It just supplies a lot more current. There's a controller. If I just tip this, is that silver box there. So this one, sorry, this is made by, it's called Razor Tip. It's made by a company called Razor Tip. They're a Canadian company, and you've got a power control. You've got a current control, which controls heat basically, and then we've got a switch which controls which of these wires is in use at any one time. This pen's plugged into this one, and there's, whilst you can't see it, there's a little LED, or a red LED. It's actually literally behind the connector. There, you can see it's on. So that controls which pen is live at the moment. And effectively all that this is a piece of resistance wire which has been squashed flat on the end. And it's screwed into these two contacts, so the current travels through it and it heats up to several hundred degrees. This one won't glow hot enough, sorry, won't get hot enough to glow, but a smaller tool like this one, for example, I can actually heat this one up enough so that this glows orange. It doesn't really help me much to do that. It's not fantastic. I'm doing this off stream again, off camera again, aren't I? So I was talking about this, where the current flows around and therefore it heats up this tip at the end, and it is just a it's a wire that's called nichrome wire, but it's also known as resistance wire. If you try and pass electricity through a resistance, it gets hot, and that's what this is doing. It's been flattened out because that's the flat shape is a characteristic that produces a particular effect on the wood, which I'm after. This one, which isn't flattened out, is just a little round wire. This is generally called a writing tip, and it makes the fact that it's round makes it a little bit like a ballpoint pen, or a slightly wide ballpoint pen, almost a calligraphy type pen. You can actually get them with a ball on the end, so it is very much like a ballpoint pen, which is also very good. And you can get other types as well. What have we got under there? These, if I just put that, this is called a shader, because you generally use it to create shades, large areas of colour. And there are different shapes of them as well. This one, this one at the top here, is called a spoon shader, because quite literally it's like a small spoon. And sometimes this can be easier to use because you don't actually have to be as precise because of the rounded area. It's easier to do lines that are close together and create a consistent colour, especially for a beginner. Flat shaders like this are quite hard because you have to be quite precise sometimes, you know, doing one line up against another, so you don't end up with an overlap which would make the overlap will go darker, or you have a slight gap which is then lighter, which you're trying to then fill in. So you get different shapes. The other pen I've got plugged in here is another shader. It's smaller, which means I can get into finer areas with it. What else do we have here? I've got a pen in. Let me just put that out of my way so I don't get burnt. And I've got one here. That's well, it is a knife blade actually. It's not very sharp, but it is a knife blade. And this can be quite useful for creating really fine lines. Oh, you can even use this to cut plastic. So these sorts of tools are used, for example, to create painting stencils for people who airbrush or do sort of stippling on walls, that sort of thing. So you can create mylar or plastic, and you can cut out the pattern that you want to leave the gap to put the paint through. They can also get used on things like plastic models to cut them and clean them up, or just to generally hack them about. So there's a range of things. You'll see a couple of differences between these pens, such as these and the one that I was using earlier. This is what's called a fixed tip pen. This one you can change the tips. I have a preference for the fixed tip pens because you lose some heat, some resistance in the connection here. So the tip sometimes doesn't get quite as hot as you might want it to do because of that. It's a small variation, but I just have a preference myself for the fixed tip pens. One of the things I often get asked as well is, do they get hot? Let me just put this pen away. The answer is yes and no. To be honest, it really depends. Well, these pens are hollow, and they've got there's you possibly can't see it on this, but there's holes in there at the bottom, and there's generally speaking slots higher up in the pen, and on the bigger ones there's holes at the top here. So what you get is any heat that does enter the pen tends to just travel up and come out the top. And generally speaking, if you're holding a pen like this, like you might to write with or scribble with, most of the heat is going straight up. So you're not actually getting a lot coming backwards here. You're just getting a small amount being conducted by the metal contacts. It does get hot if you hold it like that. And I do that for some work, and then it's a bit like holding your fingers over the top of a candle flame, about an inch or so above a candle flame. It starts to get really warm and uncomfortable and sting a little bit, and of course you don't keep doing it till you burn yourself, but so there you go. Are you trying to troll me, Stephen? Explain again. What particular parts would you like me to explain again? If you'd like to say, rather than me just try and remember the whole thing from the start. But I don't mind explaining it. That's part of the reason why I do streams. So the controller. Okay. Let me point the camera at the control. Well, yes, I'll point the camera at the controller because it's easier. I will bring it a bit closer, but there's wires all over the desk. Move the light a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see for the moment. This machine is made by Razortip. It's a Canadian manufacturer. The purpose of this is obviously to convert mains electricity down to the low voltage which is used by the pens, and it does that. It has a variable element to it as well, so it controls just how much electricity is sent to the pen using this. So we've got a mains on off switch here, on and off. We've got a control here which controls the amount of electricity. technically the current, and we've got a switch here which will switch between the two pens. Most machines only have one pen connected to them. This is one of the reasons why I like this one, because it has two. It's a bit easier than unplugging them all the time, or some machines you've actually got to take a screwdriver to unscrew contacts to change a pen. And I tend to use, well, most of the time I tend to use two. Not very many times do I use more than two. So when this is on, this controls how much electricity is sent to the pen. Different pens work differently. So for example, the pen I'm using, which is this one here, this is sort of a it's nearly at 7. That's a medium sort of heat for this particular pen. It would be completely over the top for this particular pen. This probably would be starting to glow, or certainly in the dark you'd be able to see that glowing a dull red at that sort of temperature, that sort of setting, and it would be really hard actually to use this particular pen at that setting, because the wood would just disappear from near the tip. There'd be a lot of smoke, the wood would tend to shrink away from it, and it produces an effect that I don't like. So even when this control's turned all the way down to 1, this is still hot enough to actually mark quite clearly the wood. So different pens react differently. These pens with the changeable tips need a little bit more higher setting than the fixed tip pens, just because there is some loss in the connection itself. They do have the advantage though that the tips are cheaper than a full pen. In the UK this is about £26. That's going to be about €32 and about $35 I think, whereas this is about £3 to £6 for a tip. And unfortunately in the UK fixed pens are harder to get. There's only a limited number of them that people stock, but you can get the various tips, and then it just takes a screwdriver just to unscrew and screw those back up. Does have the advantage that you can try out more different tips, which is why actually I have this one and this one. I got these to try them out to see whether I like them, and if I like them I will tend at some point to get a fixed version of it. I just feel more comfortable using those. That's just me though. Other people of course are quite happy with these. So that's the controller. There's quite a few others available, but they do, you know, they've got different characteristics. Now these and you get different types of things as well. This type of controller is used. Let me now move that just a bit out of the way. This type of controller is used a lot to produce artwork of this sort of style. I sort of describe it as photorealistic. It's not like a photograph. You know, it's not the same quality as a photograph will be in clarity or whatever, but a closely related style to this is an illustration style where everything is outlined in black. So you get a black outline which is then coloured in, which can look quite amazing as well. But if you look at a photograph of something, it doesn't have a black outline around it, which is why I describe this as a sort of photorealistic. You rely on the contrast between different areas for you to see the edges. We don't outline them in this style. We don't outline them in a black line. So these types of tools and that type of controller are ideally suited to this sort of work, and with that writing tip, I could outline the edges with a nice black line if I wanted, and then fill the areas in with these. So it's great for creating shaded areas. There are other tools though. There's one that's commonly sold in hobby shops. Is like a soldering, well, it is a soldering iron I guess, with a like a cone shaped tip on it. You can do this sort of work with it. You just have to work in a different way to do it, and there are people that make some really excellent work using those sorts of tools. The most beginners though will use them like a black felt tip pen, so they'll draw outlines, they'll do black and white work, or they'll do cross hatching to create tones rather than shading. But you know, it's skill develops, you can use things in different ways, and some of those sorts of tools as well can often be got with like shaped ends, so like a heart shape or a diamond shape, so it can be used like a stamp or a brand, and you can create patterns using those, and it's just a different art form. Okay, Steve-O, have a good evening, enjoy the use of your PS4 extra PS4, and I hope your upstream bandwidth comes back quickly and you can we can see you streaming again. So yeah, so the different types of tools. As I said earlier, you can even use an acetylene torch, but you'd be doing that outside on a big piece of wood, and you probably will be setting fire to things. But there are some artists that do that, so you know, it's not, you don't have to use that sort of tool. There are people that really do excellent work with sort of very you know, almost a poker, for example, you know, or like a, you know, you could use a screwdriver over a candle to heat it up, or a burner, and then use a screwdriver. So you don't actually have to go for expensive stuff, and that's not cheap, to be honest. Wood wise, you can do pyrography on any wood. Some are better than others for various reasons. The wood colour, the natural wood colour, has an impact. So if you take a very dark wood like ebony, for example, which is almost black, you might imagine to actually be able to see something on it, you actually have to get blacker than the background of the wood. So on ebony, you might, if you really spend a bit of time, you'll get maybe a black and not so black image on there. Kind of like one shade is all you get, and I'm exaggerating a little bit. You can get more than that, but it's a lot of hard work. And you can go up to wood like this, which is birch, which is an excellent wood to use. It's very light, as you can. The natural wood colours at the top here. Oh, I can turn it over, and that's the natural wood colour. Birch is very light, so you get a lot more. You get the ability to use a lot more range of shade. You know, this one is covered in all sorts of different shades, so you have more scope for this type of art. But equally well, you can do stamp type art on here, pure black and white work as well. One of the things this wood has is the grain, or the rings, which you might be able to see some of them, but they don't really show up. If I just, you can sort of see, you'll sort of see sort of slightly darker patches. As you can see on stream, they're not really easy to see. Now you can see some down here, across here. So you know, birch is a wood where they're quite hard to see, so it doesn't impact upon the image that you want to put on top. You can go, if you get wood like pine, the rings are quite yellow compared to the rest of the wood. They stand out, but you might want to incorporate that into your artwork, for example, so the rings become part of the artwork, so then they're not a detriment. And indeed, there's Cannonbear is a streamer who was doing some pyrography on a piece of, I think it was Purple Heart, where one of the rings, it was like a large knot, but it was a really beautiful purple dark area, which kind of looked like a plasma flame, which he then used as part of his artwork. So you know, the swings and roundabouts. The other thing about birch and poplar is another one, and basswood or European lime, is that when you apply pyrography to the rings or to the whiter wood between it, it's approximately the same density of colour that they take on, so the rings don't suddenly jump out at you, and nor do the rings shrink away from the tool any different to the whiter areas between them. If you try it on pine, the rings stand proud and the white wood between it really shrinks away from the heated tool, unless you use particular techniques to avoid it. So you end up with sort of ridges and dips, which again, if you can use it in your artwork, it's okay. If you can't, then it's a detriment. I'm also using plywood here, so I don't know if you're familiar with plywood, but it's made up of layers of wood, and I'm just holding that just off camera, but there's 3 layers of wood in this, rather than a solid piece of wood. And that also has an advantage. Well, one of the advantages is easy to get hold of as plywood. But the second advantage of it is, if I was doing this on a solid piece of wood this thick, when you apply pyrography, the wood shrinks. So the top surface of this wood would shrink in relation to the bottom. That would make it curl. Well, actually, depending on where you've applied the pyrography, it'll curl in all sorts of directions. And this one indeed does a little bit. That top corner, it's rocking very slightly across that axis there. If I just press it down, the other two are more or less flat. But if this was a solid piece of wood, that would probably be a lot more pronounced. But the way that plywood is constructed, you'll get a base layer of wood. The first layer of wood will go down, say, like that. The middle layer will go down like that, and then your top layer will go down like at an angle. So all the 3 layers are at an angle to each other. And what that does is it tends to resist the warping. So plywood is a good sort of wood to use. So hopefully, Stephen, that's given you a good overview. But it doesn't have to be a sheet of wood like this. You can use shapes. That's an oval shape, so it doesn't have to be rectangular. A small oval shape. What else have I got around here? It could be a box. Something, a wooden box of some kind. I sometimes just use offcuts of wood. So this is a bit of wall. This is ash. It's a different wood, and as you can see, the rings are really prominent on this. So that might not be a very good piece to do pyrography on. Or what I might want, what I could have done with this piece, for example, is say, you know what, that looks a bit like a pond with ripples on it. So maybe I'll do some artwork where it's a pond. Maybe a fish jumps out or something. So you could incorporate that sort of thing. This is just a scrap piece of wood, but which I then did just a bit of writing on for some people on stream. But that's an example of stamping, for example. That was made up with one of those tools, just held in place, so little clovers. But you can do, there's a door hanger here. So pre-cut door hanger to do things on. But you don't actually have to use wood. You can use paper, for example. Well, sorry, it needs to be fairly thick paper like this. This is actually wallpaper, lining paper. But it's quite a thick paper, and you can apply pyrography to that. So I'll just heat the tool up. You've got a slightly different techniques. You've got to be a bit faster, but and a bit more controlled, so I've got some nice light colour there, and then get darker. Now I probably can't go much darker than that without actually charring right through the paper, but you know, I can. It is possible to do. Actually, I've got to be careful it doesn't go all the way through onto the wood underneath. You can. So you know, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be wood, thin card. It is possible to do it on cotton, but that's really hard to work on. Gourds are used a lot for this sort of work. You know, for this decorating gourds. You can do it on leather as well, and some leather produces some really nice shading. You ideally need to use naturally tanned or vegetable plant tanned leather rather than chemical tanned leather, because you're applying heat, and some of the chemicals when you apply heat get quite noxious, so you might want to be careful doing leather, but you can do leather. You can do bone as well, and of course in theory you can do ivory. A lot of in the past ivory was used with pyrography, so the black markings sometimes you see on ivory figures is a pyrographic technique. Sailors used to do it a lot using a sail needle and a little spirit burner. Of course, ivory these days, it's illegal to use ivory for anything, or even to do anything with ivory. So you won't see new pieces or anything like that done with ivory. What else could you do it on? Don't actually know. I mean, effectively anything that will I keep wanting to say skull, but that's not right. Effectively, that will char, I suppose, with heat. You can do it on. Some are better than others. Cotton, as I say, is really quite difficult to work on. The drier it is, the harder it is to do, because it tends to go from no colour to black, carbonised in one go if it's really dry. Wood isn't that daft as it sounds. It's not that dry, and so that's one of the reasons why it colours quite well. So it is an organic substance. You can't do it with plastic, for example. Plastic will either melt or just turn to like a carbonised mixture. So it does tend to be mostly natural fibres. So I guess you could do it on if you sort of were able to weave dried grass, for example, you could do it on something like that. Anyway, I shall carry on a little bit longer. And if anybody told you about Train Simulator, by the way, if anybody is interested in Train Simulator, Matt Pendleton, I think, has probably just gone live since I heard the chortle a minute ago. So if you have an interest in Train Simulator and you're not aware of Matt, he'll be over in the Train Simulator game section, but you might want to check him out. I watch him after I finish streaming, so I'm not going there just yet, but I will be there later on. I'm now making this shadow a bit darker because I've darkened everything else around it, so it's not as dark as it looked like when it was first applied. With pyrography, a lot of it is to do with, I would say contrast, but the comparison between two areas. So when I first applied this shadow, it looked really dark until I put the dark part of the ear behind it, and then it started to look really light. And you'll get like this area here looks really light, but when I first did it, it didn't look light at all until I put the background behind it, and then it looked almost white. and you get some of these areas. This area, for example, here looked really, I've got my hand in the way, really dark to start with, until I put something darker behind it and it got lighter. So it's all about things being relative to other things. Sorry, I could see something flashing just here, at the corner of my eye. This tool's a little bit hot for doing this in this way. So I'll just cool it down a bit. Sometimes you don't want the tool to be too hot, because the wood changes colour so rapidly sometimes. Sorry, I've just my PC is water cooled, and it's got a flow sensor on it, and occasionally that flow sensor just loses communications, and then the main controller beeps, which is what it was just doing. But of course, if the pump stopped running, the flow sensor would stop as well. So I was just checking out it wasn't going to continue beeping, because then I'd be going away really quickly. Yeah, so sometimes it can be a lot better to have the tool cool, and then do multiple passes rather than trying to do it too quickly, or use the tool really hot, because it'll go from nothing to really dark in one go, and that it might be really seriously detrimental to your piece. If, for example, I just wanted to do something light on the forehead here, and I had this turned up too much and it went as dark as his eye, effectively I've ruined the piece. It's really hard to recover from. There are techniques to erase, or at least mitigate, but they're not always as successful as they might be. To erase an area, for example, I could scrape it. As you saw with the grass, if you were watching, this was dark, and I scraped and it's got lighter. But it does have a disadvantage in that in scraping it, what I'm actually doing is roughing up the surface, and then if I put pyrography over the top, you'll see the difference in it because of the rough surface. If you try sanding, then the sanding changes the surface as well. Maybe not as much, but you have to apply it over a larger area then, and then you've got to match in with the colour with the pyrography. Again, it's still a slightly different surface texture, and it can be visible in certain lights. Same with because this is kind of like a natural varnish which is on top of the wood. You can use like an alcohol or isopropyl alcohol, something like that, a solvent, to remove some of the colour, but again that then raises the grain of the wood, which changes the surface texture. So there are ways, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily be as effective as you might want. You have a water-cooled CPU and that's it? Yeah, well mine is, I cool the CPU, the north and south bridge, and the graphics card. Yeah, just those four. Yeah, I don't do the memory. And I don't do the discs, and there's I've got a 360. No, I've got a 480 radiator in the bottom. I did have two, but I only really need one. I don't overclock this thing these days, so it's I don't need the extra radiator. But I use water cooling because I can't hear it. The PC I had before this had 10 fans, I think, in it, and it used to, well, it was in the same place where this one is, at the other side of the desk, which is about 4 feet away, and it was noisy, and it was a kind of a pleasure to turn it off at the end of the night. And it used to sound like a jet engine winding down when you turned it off. So I was going, I didn't want another noisy machine. So water cooling is the easiest way of doing that. Maybe, there are other ways of doing it. Water cooling was the easiest, and I wanted to have a go at it. So mine's water cooled. Yeah, 95-degree heaters. Mine never exceeds, well, I was about to say never, that's wrong, because yesterday it would have done. I'm about 20 degrees above ambient temperature on the water, and therefore the CPU is about 20 degrees above ambient temperature, and the graphics card as well. I've not got a 290 though. Mine's an old card these days. I've had it about 5 years, so it was a top card back then, but these days lots of things beat it. But I can still run most things. I kind of like, what's the latest cards? 590s? Be nice to have a couple of those. 5.8, is it 5.7.8? I don't know. Whatever the latest one is, the top one. It would kind of be nice to have one of those, but as you say, they're big heaters. And it's surprising how much heat comes out of this thing. It was spec to be able to dump about 700 watts of heat. And it's a 1.2 kilowatt power supply in it, so there's quite a lot there, but because it's an old i7 processor as well, so the newer ones are a little bit more thermally efficient. This is scratching again. 390s. So what's AMD? What's the Nvidia ones then? Is it Nvidia? Yeah. I'm not particularly up on them these days. I get the junk mail adverts, spam, but well, it's not spam because I originally bought things from the company, but I don't take a great deal of notice. When I get around to deciding that I need to build another machine, then I'll do the research then, rather than trying to keep up on it now. I don't tend to swap out stuff very often. If you run them flat out, yeah. Back when I got this, running SLI or whatever the other one is, was still somewhat problematic. So back then it was kind of one card rather than two. But yeah, saying which, I mean, the card's 5 years old, and it's running 3 monitors, 2 in HD and 1 in greater than HD. So the 2 of the monitors are 1920 by 1080. The Cintiq that's next to me is about 2280 by 1000 plus. And it will run things like Photoshop and Coral Painter, which is my main applications, with reasonable, there's certain things it lags out on, but with reasonable sort of thing. And the other games that I play, I can wind them up reasonably well. I mean, it's things like Euro Truck. I guess if I turn some of switch some of the displays off, I'd have more power to run them in higher resolutions, but they run quite high anyway. With Train Simulator and with Euro Truck Simulator. I've not tried the Flight Simulator yet, so as I say, I'm not. That doesn't bother me a great deal. And I have run some other games in quite high resolutions, and quite anti-aliasing turned up and things like that. So it's no slouch. And the GPU is not overclocked. The CPU is a 2.4 GHz CPU, which I have had running at 4 gigs. So if I really need to, I can wind that up a bit. Creates a bit of heat, and it's quite a bit of an overvolt on the CPU to do it. So I tend to, most of the time, well, none of the time, I don't really need it. And this thing was powerful enough with the video editing software I had to run a PAL standard output, because I used to do a lot of video editing down onto DVD, and it would do the video encoding for that in real time, or slightly faster than real time. It wouldn't handle HD these days, but I can, so I didn't really see a need to overclock it much. It was an interesting exercise, but ultimately I turned it down and got less heat. And on weather like yesterday, that's a good thing. Of course, we are 390s there in winter. It'll save a bit on the heating bills. So I've put some creasing in here just above the top of the trunk, and now I'm just going to darken between it a little bit. It's too bright, but because I've put those lines in, if I go over them as I'm doing now, they don't disappear, they just get a bit darker, so you still are able to see where they are, even though I've sort of coloured over the top of them. So one of the nice things about pyrography is as you go over something, it gets darker. So if I go over a whole area like this, the bits that I've already done just get a bit darker, so I tend to maintain the difference between the shades. Which makes some things easier. So like when I was doing the draft, for example, I could do the background here just by going straight across, and I didn't have to worry about trying to get right up to the edge but not go over the skin. I could just go straight over the top, and that way I don't get a white edge, and the contrast or the difference between the tones was maintained, so I didn't even have to go back over and do any correcting. It's quite a useful thing in pyrography wise, is that? Now then, bone structure wise, the eye comes down to, the eye socket almost comes to a point around this sort of area here, and this side, there's almost a bone up here and over the top. I don't know how far it goes back, but the forehead sort of comes over and then dips down over the side of the eye. So what I'm going to need to do is make sure that an area around here is slightly darker than the forehead, so that you get that impression of it tipping over the side. Now I've done some of that already, but it's not fantastically visible, and I've got to watch for things like that happening. Which is, I caught the back of this here. I've caught one of the back edges, and because I've been working with the tool not quite flat, the back edge is hotter than the front, and when it got down on the wood like that, that's what happens. Gigi Richie, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening, and thank you very much for that. That's kind of you to say so. Now, the sun is coming in from this sort of angle here, so I'm going to get a shadow off the tusk onto the nose, which is basically what you can see around here. It's slightly darker, so I have to make sure I maintain that when I move, when I darken some of this area around here. And I probably want it very slightly darker than the rest of the skin around here, because it is a shadow. I am kind of debating with myself though whether or not to actually do that. Whilst it should be there, it might well not look particularly good to put in, so I'm sort of debating with myself a little bit whether to do that. I may just do a little bit of a hint of it, kind of like I did here with the shadow off the giraffe. You can sort of vaguely see what looks to be a shadow. I'm doing very well today, thank you, Gigi Rich. That's I trust you are as well. Being in the UK, don't know if you are, but up here in Yorkshire the weather has been somewhat kinder to us, which has made the studio a lot more pleasant. I'm still getting beeps. I don't like it when I get beeps off my machine. I'm doing this on thin wood. It's plywood, birch plywood, so it's about 3mm thick, so it's out of focus, but you can probably see the 3 plies or the 3 layers there. It's easier to work on wood than it is on cardboard or paper, as you mentioned there. Although both of them, as you may have gathered, it is possible to do work on them. I tend not to try, because it's a lot harder to do, but I was demonstrating a little bit on the stream earlier. It's very, very hot, so you're inside. Yeah, I'm guessing maybe you have suitable air conditioning there, or I'm guessing I am guessing that you might have suitable air conditioning to help with that. I have some unsuitable air conditioning here that doesn't really do much, but maintains a bit of the bit of coolness. You're also a little bit more used to it over there than we are. Got a little bit of a light area just to one side, so I just need to turn this around just to get in with the tool without going over into the tusk, which I don't want to do. What I'm going to do is just darken around there a little bit. Just make it stand out a bit more. There's one argument for actually putting the shadow in, is to make that a little bit darker so the tusk does stand out a bit more. Okay, yeah, South Florida. Okay, yeah. We'll never get used to it. Yeah, well, obviously you've got the experience. We don't. I don't have that experience. I usually find it's the humidity that bothers me more than the heat. Heat does, but yesterday, for example, it rained here for exactly 10 minutes. It didn't cool anything down, but the humidity went through the roof, and that was worse than if it hadn't rained at all. Mind you, I have been down there in Florida in some of your rainstorms, and they're definitely interesting. And cold tea doesn't really help much, but it's a drink anyway. And I need to darken off the side here, the trunk. Just enough. What's enough? I don't know. It's a judgment with all of this sort of, with working in this sort of style, and potentially there's no right or wrong answer. It's whatever you think it should be as the artist. Just the same as I'm not putting in a great deal of detail. I'm sort of putting the odd marking in like this for the some of the skin texture on the elephant, and down here I'm not gonna put in all the skin marking. It seems too much like hard work for me. Oh, that's good. I'm glad you don't have the hurricanes. I've been down there through some of the lightning storms, and they are spectacular but frightening. And some of the rainstorms. One of the sayings here in Yorkshire is it doesn't so much rain as they pour it out of buckets, and it's kind of like that way down where you are, isn't it? I mean, it just comes down as a solid block of water. But yeah, no hurricanes. We seem to be getting out hurricanes, like whirlwinds anyway. We occasionally get these days up in the UK, but Nothing like you guys. I've not got quite enough colour just around here. This is where the tusk comes out of the skin. Doesn't quite look right. Yes. Great way to. Well, thank you very much for following me on Twitter. That's very kind of you. Of course, now you should, of course, get the tweets when I go live. As I usually say at the end of the stream, I tweet when I go live, not when I have my breakfast. Those people who have been on stream will probably know it before, will know that face. We have pussycats, and their hairs sometimes get onto pieces like this, and when you catch it with a hot tool, you get that burnt hair smell. If you've never smelt it, you're quite lucky. It's horrible. I get quite a bit doing this. Does that edge there needs to just disappear a little bit. It's better. It's not right, but it looks better. Yeah. I'm going to turn this down a little bit because it'll make it easier. I've got to this edge is a little bit abrupt. The shadow is only there just because of the fact that it dips down and comes up again. I just need to soften off that edge a bit. Looking at what you guys see is quite helpful to me, because you've got a slightly different perspective on it. So, like you'll see me here, I'm trying to just colour in that area, doing a bit of hand-eye coordination because I'm doing it down here while watching my monitor. So I'm watching actually the outgoing stream, but I get to see it a bit like you see it from a slightly different angle, and it helps me see things that don't quite look right. So if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm looking up there. Yes, that's one thing I never did understand about Twitter. When you see some of them, I'm just having my lunch, and oh, I'm just going out the door. Great. What's good about this door that you're going out of? Or is it a comment about the play you've just seen or something? But yeah. I'm gonna say, I was about to say, half the time they're automatic tweets anyway with some of the things, isn't it? You post something on Instagram and it gets tweeted out, or you post something somewhere and it gets tweeted out. But there again, Twitch is doing the tweeting for me, so I can't really say much about that, but it generally just is the stream title. Unless Twitch has been really awkward and disconnected me half a dozen times, then I'm guessing I could get a bit annoyed. But yeah. Yep, I don't even tweet what's in my sandwiches, so you're quite lucky, Gigi Rich. Okay, I think we will leave that for this evening. We're now at about 10 past 10 here in the UK. So I've been streaming for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Let me turn that off so I don't forget and have a hot tool hanging around. So I need to tilt the camera to. Excuse me, I'm just going to cover the face cam, just to give you a better overview of. Slide it that way, so you can get a better overview of what it's looking like at the moment as a full picture. So we've done quite a bit of work down here now, which evened this sort of area out, and did some darkening across here. So what we're now seeing is more like you would see with quite a low sun off where my right hand is here. So you'd see quite a light area from the sunlight reflection, but you should be seeing it as kind of a little bit red. Weird effect, but because it's all brown, but you kind of got the expectation, and we'll be seeing it that sort of way. As you come closer, it gets dark, and we've got a little bit of grassland showing up here. It shows up better in real life, to be honest, rather than on the stream, but you get a little bit of grass just hinted at around here, because it's meant to be a savanna, with the elephant and the giraffe in the background, and of course being sunset you've got a real dark background. And so today, as apart from that, we've done some texturing here on the trunk. And I can see I need to do a little bit more work here. It's from the angle you're looking at it, that looks a bit too light, so I need to do some work on that tomorrow. From where I'm looking at it, it looks okay, so that's one of the advantages of looking at it with the camera. So we've textured around there, done a little bit more deeper texturing on the head here, and started to shade up the side of the, I keep wanting to call it nose, I suppose it is a nose, but the trunk, where it comes up into the eye socket, and then I don't know where it goes from there. And then we'll have to do some work around here as well. But we're getting quite close to a finished piece. I'm quite pleased with it. The brown looks really nice because it's a sunset. It's a sepia tone, so it kind of suits an African sunset hot sort of theme, which is a nice sort of side effect of pyrography. It always looks like a summer evening or summer, hot weather and things like that. Anyway, guys, I hope you're enjoying watching the stream. Thank you, Gigi Rich. It's getting close to what I would call finished. Other people, other more excellent artists will probably be able to do a lot more with it, but we'll see. I can end up playing with things and doing little tiny bits for weeks on end, and I don't really want to do that. I've got to learn when to stop. As I say, that's it. That's kind of it for tonight. So I'm just going to remind anybody that's watching that isn't following. I would appreciate it if you did, if you want to do so. If you don't, you could also do what Gigi Rich did there. Follow me on Twitter. That way you'll get the tweet when I go live. And as I have mentioned, I don't tweet about food, just the stream. Alternatively, if you would just like to try and catch me for my next stream, I stream generally from around 8 PM in the UK. That's 1900 hours GMT. Or to make it simple for you, if you're in a different time zone, if you take a look at your clock, subtract 2¼ hours, that would have been 8 PM in the UK. I stream from that time, barring family events, every night of the week, 7 nights a week. Occasionally I will stream on a weekend during the UK afternoons, which is about 4 hours earlier, 4 or 5 hours earlier than my normal stream time, but that's highly variable. So generally, if you want to be sure, 8 PM in the UK. Apart from that, thank you all for watching, interacting, being in the stream. Those of you that are lurking, you're welcome to do so. Thank you for staying and watching. It's really kind of you, and I do appreciate it. So see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.